We are taught that history is a straight line. We are told that it moves in one direction, upward and outward, from the mud of the primordial soup to the footprints on the lunar surface. We believe that once a milestone is reached, it is etched into the eternal record of the universe, never to be erased. But look closer at the ground beneath your feet. Geology tells a different story. It speaks of cycles. It speaks of erasures. It speaks of entire epochs where the planet scrubbed itself clean, leaving behind nothing but silence and strata. There is a concept in science known as the Silurian hypothesis. It asks a haunting question. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth hundreds of millions of years ago, long before the dinosaurs, would we be able to find it today? The answer, according to our best geological models, is likely no. Cities crumble to dust. Plastic degrades. Iron oxidizes. Tectonic plates subduct, melting the crust and everything upon it back into magma. Given enough time, Earth is a self-cleaning machine. It is within this terrifying context of impermanence that we must examine the modern skepticism surrounding the moon landing. For decades, a growing number of voices have whispered and now shouted that the Apollo missions were impossible. We dismiss them as conspiracy theorists, but perhaps we are missing the deeper philosophical signal they are broadcasting. Their doubt is not merely a distrust of government, it is an intuitive recognition of a fundamental truth about time. If we struggle to maintain the evidence of an event that happened only 50 years ago, how can we possibly claim to know what happened 50 million years ago? The skeptic's argument, when stripped of its paranoia, reveals a crack in our reality. It suggests that human achievement is not permanent. It suggests that we are not the first masters of this world, nor will we be the last. We are simply the current tenants of a planet that specializes in amnesia. To understand why they say the moon landing is impossible, we must first understand how easily the truth vanishes. We are not just investigating a rocket launch. We are investigating the fragility of memory itself, the entropy of truth. The primary weapon of the historian is the document. The primary weapon of the geologist is the fossil. But what happens when the record simply ceases to exist? One of the central pillars of the moon landing skepticism is the case of the missing telemetry data. It is an admitted fact of history that the original high-quality magnetic tapes from the Apollo 11 mission, the raw, uncompressed data of humanity's greatest achievement, were erased. They were not stolen by spies. They were not destroyed in a war. They were simply reformatted and reused by NASA in the years following the mission because of a shortage of magnetic tape. To the skeptic, this is the smoking gun of a fabrication. They ask how a civilization capable of traversing the void could be so careless with the proof of its journey. But let us reinterpret this event through the lens of deep time. This loss of data is not an anomaly. It is the natural state of the universe. It is entropy in action. The erasure of the Apollo tapes is a perfect modern metaphor for what geologists call an unconformity. In geology, an unconformity is a missing page in the Book of Stone. It is a contact between two rock units where the layers in between are missing, having been eroded away or never deposited at all. We have unconformities in the Earth's crust that represent gaps of 1 billion years. 1 billion years of silence. 1 billion years where mountains may have risen, empires may have fallen, and complex life may have flourished, only to be ground down to sand and washed into the oblivion of a subduction zone. When the skeptic points to the missing Apollo tapes and cries impossible, they are reacting to the speed of this entropy. They are witnessing the great filter of time acting in fast forward. If we can lose the definitive digital proof of our technological apex in less than a human lifetime, consider the implications for the deep past. Imagine a civilization that thrived during the Carboniferous period, 300 million years ago. They built with concrete, glass, and steel. But after 3 million centuries of rain, wind, and tectonic shifting, their concrete would be nothing more than a weirdly concentrated layer of sediment. Their steel would be a vein of iron ore. Their glass would be indistinguishable from quartz sand. The skepticism of the moon landing, therefore, is not just about the shadows in a photograph or the waving of a flag. It is a confrontation with the void. It is the realization that proof is temporary. The missing tapes forces us to confront the possibility that truth is a perishable resource. If the documentation of our own history can rot away in a government warehouse, then the documentation of Earth's pre-human history has almost certainly been pulverized. The skeptic looks at the moon landing and sees a ghost story, an event that we are told happened, but for which the physical primary source evidence is slowly slipping through our fingers like sand. This leads us to a disturbing conclusion. We trust the narrative of the moon landing because we lived through it, or our parents did. We have oral history. But oral history dies. Once the last human who saw the broadcast passes away, Apollo becomes mythology. It becomes no more real than the stories of Atlantis or the wars of the gods described in the Vedic texts. The argument for impossibility is rooted in this transition from memory to myth. And if we accept that our own history is this fragile, we must open the door to the terrifying possibility that we are walking on top of the graves of a forgotten greatness, hidden by the same entropy that erased the tapes. The biological barrier. To leave the Earth is to commit an act of defiance against the natural order. For billions of years, life on this planet has existed within a fragile, protected bubble. We are shielded by the atmosphere and coddled by the magnetic field. But the moment we attempt to step outside this cradle, we are met not with emptiness but with fire. Surrounding our blue marble are the Van Allen radiation belts. These are immense donut-shaped regions of energetic charged particles, captured and held in place by Earth's magnetosphere. They are invisible to the naked eye, yet they represent one of the most formidable barriers in the solar system. Skeptics of the moon landing frequently cite these belts as the ultimate do-not-pass sign. They argue that the radiation levels trapped within these zones are lethal to biological organisms. They point to the thin aluminum hull of the Apollo command module, a skin hardly thicker than heavy-duty foil, and question how fragile human flesh could pass through this cosmic furnace without sustaining fatal DNA damage or immediate radiation sickness. The official narrative tells us that the trajectory was calculated to thread the needle, passing through the thinnest parts of the belts at high velocity to minimize exposure. But the skeptic asks a deeper, more uncomfortable question. What if the barrier is not meant to be crossed? Consider the implications of a quarantine Earth. If we view the Earth not as a launching pad but as a closed system, the impossibility of the moon landing takes on a new shape. It becomes a question of biological limitations. We are evolved for gravity, for oxygen, and for magnetic protection. This brings us back to the shadows of the past. If the Silurian hypothesis is true, if a high-technology civilization rose during the Permian or the Eocene, they would have encountered this same barrier of fire. Perhaps they too looked up at the moon with longing. Perhaps they too built rockets. But what if they found that they could not leave? If you are finding value in this exploration of the unknown and wish to support our journey into the deep mysteries of Earth's past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue digging through the strata of forgotten history. Imagine a civilization of reptilian or amphibian intelligence, millions of years before the first mammal. They may have mastered atomic energy. They may have mapped the continents, but perhaps they discovered that their biology was inextricably tied to the planetary shield. The radiation belts would have been an absolute limit, a ceiling they could touch but never break. This perspective reframes the moon landing skepticism. The doubt is not necessarily about the engineering of the rocket, it is about the hubris of the biology. The skeptic intuitively feels that we are prisoners of this rock. To claim we walked on the moon is to claim that we broke the fundamental rules of our containment. If pre-dinosaur civilizations existed, their inability to colonize the solar system would explain why we find no monoliths on Mars or ruins on Venus. They were trapped here just as we are. They lived their cycle, consumed their resources, and were eventually swallowed by the Earth's geological grinder. The moon landing represents the only moment in history where we claim to have escaped the quarantine. To deny it is to accept that we are no different from the trilobites or the dinosaurs, destined to live and die entirely within the confines of the atmosphere. The radiation belts stand as a silent, lethal guardian, keeping the history of Earth confined to Earth. If the barrier is truly impassable, then the Apollo missions were a fabrication designed to make us feel like gods, when in reality, we are merely the latest inmates of a beautiful planetary prison. And if we are prisoners, the question remains, what happened to the cellmates who were here before us? The anachronism of technology. There is a peculiar dissonance when one looks inside the cockpit of the Apollo lunar module. It does not look like a vessel capable of traversing the void. It is a maze of toggle switches, analog dials, and aluminum sheets held together with rivets that look hand-placed. The computing power aboard the guidance system was less than that of a modern musical greeting card. Yet, we are told this primitive assembly of metal and wire achieved what our modern supercomputers struggle to replicate. This brings us to one of the most compelling and frustrating arguments put forth by skeptics: the concept of technological amnesia. Today, the plans for the Saturn V rocket still exist on microfilm. We have the schematics, we have the equations, yet NASA engineers have famously admitted that we cannot build it anymore. The manufacturing infrastructure is gone. The specific expertise of the men who hand-welded the F1 engines has died with them. The complex supply chains that created the specific alloys have dissolved. We possess the artifact, but we have lost the capability. This admission strikes a discordant note in the modern mind. We are conditioned to believe that technology is a cumulative ladder, that we only ever go up, adding knowledge to knowledge. We believe that if we did something in 1969, we should be able to do it twice as easily in 2024. But history, if we look closely, is not a ladder. It is a wave. The skeptic looks at the Saturn V and sees an anomaly, an out-of-place artifact in its own time. But this phenomenon is not unique to the 20th century. It mirrors the great mysteries of the ancient world. Consider the precision of the granite boxes in the Serapeum of Saqqara or the massive tritholons of Baalbek. We look at these stones today and we scratch our heads. Our best engineers admit that replicating these feats, even with modern hydraulic cranes and diamond-tipped saws, would be a logistical nightmare. The ancients did it with copper chisels, or so we are told. Or consider the Antikythera mechanism, a clockwork computer of bronze gears found in a shipwreck from ancient Greece. It displays a level of astronomical precision that would not be seen again in Europe for 1,500 years. This is the pattern. A civilization reaches a peak of capability, achieves the impossible, and then slides back into the dark. The knowledge is not just forgotten, it is practically erased. If we apply this cyclical view to the deep time of Earth, the implications are staggering. If humanity can forget how to reach the moon in a mere 50 years, what could the Earth have forgotten in 50 million? The Silurian hypothesis suggests that we might not be the first industrial society. Perhaps there was a time in the lush jungles of the Carboniferous or the swamps of the Cretaceous when another species reached their own peak. Perhaps they too had their Apollo moment. They split the atom. They built their engines. They reached for the sky. And then the wave crashed. The skepticism of the moon landing, therefore, is rooted in the uncomfortable reality of regression. The impossibility of the event is not that it violated physics, but that it violated our arrogance. We assume we are the apex of history. But the rusting launch pads of Cape Canaveral and the silent stones of Egypt whisper the same truth. Capability is fleeting. Maybe the Apollo missions were real. But they were a singularity, a brief, flickering moment where the tumblers of history aligned only to scramble again. We look back at the grainy footage of Neil Armstrong not as a prologue to our future, but as a relic of a lost golden age, already as distant and mysterious to us as the builders of the pyramids. We are a species that is constantly waking up in the ruins of its own achievements, wondering how the giants before us moved the stones. The silent witness. Let us turn the lens away from the chaotic, churning surface of our own planet and look at the silent, gray watcher in the sky. Earth is a planet of erasure. It is a biological engine that recycles its crust, consumes its dead, and buries its history. But the moon is different. The moon is a place of absolute, terrifying memory. It has no atmosphere to speak of. No rain falls to wash away the dust. No wind blows to erode the stone. No tectonic plates slide over one another to melt the surface into magma. The moon is a geological mausoleum, A footprint left in the regolith today will remain sharp and undisturbed for millions of years, barring a direct meteor strike. This brings us to the most haunting intersection between the moon landing skepticism and the Silurian hypothesis. If a complex industrial civilization existed on Earth during the Carboniferous period or the Triassic, and if they possessed the technology to leave the atmosphere, their launch pads on Earth would be gone. Their cities would be sediment, their bones would be oil, but if they went to the moon, their artifacts would still be there. Getty Images. A rover left by a non-human intelligence 300 million years ago would not rust. It would sit in the vacuum, bleached by the sun, perhaps dusted by micrometeoroids, but undeniably intact. A flag planted by a forgotten species would still be standing, a stiff testament to a dead empire. This is the double-edged sword of the skeptics' argument. When skeptics analyze the Apollo photographs, they are often looking for what is wrong: the diverging shadows, the lack of stars, the crosshairs that appear behind objects. But the deeper, more existential anxiety comes from what is missing. The official images of the moon show a desolate, empty wasteland, a dead rock. If we accept the possibility of pre-dinosaur civilizations, then the emptiness of the moon implies something profound. We are the first. It suggests that in the 4.5 billion years of Earth's history, through all the rising and falling of species, through the reign of the giant insects and the thunder of the dinosaurs, no one else ever escaped the gravity well. No one else stood where Neil Armstrong stood. The silence of the moon confirms the loneliness of the human species. However, there is another possibility, one that fuels the darker fires of skepticism. Skeptics have long claimed that NASA airbrushes the lunar photography. They argue that the blurry patches and low-resolution areas of the lunar maps are intentional. Usually, this is dismissed as paranoia about alien bases, but let us reframe it through the lens of lost earthly civilizations. If we went to the moon and found it clean, we are alone. But if we went to the moon and found it occupied, not by little green men from another star, but by the ancient, preserved machinery of a terrestrial predecessor, the shock would shatter our understanding of reality. It would prove that we are trapped in a cycle. It would prove that others had climbed the mountain before us, only to fall back into the dust. The impossibility of the moon landing, then, becomes a psychological shield. It is easier to believe that we faked the mission than to face the two alternative terrors, either that we are terrifyingly alone in deep time, or that the moon is a graveyard of previous attempts. The skeptic demands high-resolution proof. They want to see the Apollo lunar module sitting on the surface today, but perhaps the reason we do not return, the reason the images remain grainy and the data remains lost, is because the moon acts as a mirror. And if we look too closely, we might see a reflection we do not recognize, a reflection of a history we have been conditioned to forget. The moon waits, preserving its secrets in the vacuum. It holds the answer to the ultimate question. Are we the masters of the Earth, or just its latest children playing among the ruins? The myth of certainty. Finally, we arrive at the edge of the precipice, looking down into the fog that separates what we know from what we believe. The skepticism surrounding the moon landing is often dismissed as a rejection of science. But if we listen closely to the frequency of the doubt, we hear something far more profound. We hear a rejection of permanence. We call the moon landing impossible, not because we lack the equations, but because deep down, in the reptilian core of our brains, we understand the rules of this planet. We understand that Earth is a jealous mother. She does not like to let her children go, and she does not like to keep their secrets. Whether the Eagle truly landed in 1969, or whether it was a flicker of theater broadcast to a terrified world, the outcome is indistinguishable. The event is already fading. The tapes are gone. The witnesses are dying. The technology is lost. In the blink of a geological eye, the Apollo missions have transformed from hard news into folklore. This is the ultimate lesson of the Silurian hypothesis. It teaches us that history is not a statue carved in granite. It is a shape drawn in the sand near the waterline. If we struggle to hold on to the truth of the last 50 years, we must surrender to the awe-inspiring probability that we are walking through a graveyard of forgotten epochs. Entire civilizations may have risen, looked at the stars, built their monuments, and screamed into the void, only to be silenced by the grinding tectonic plates. We are not the first to dream of the impossible, and we will likely not be the last to forget we ever achieved it. The skeptic, then, is not the enemy of the truth. They are the unintended guardian of a deeper reality, that certainty is an illusion. To question the moon landing is to acknowledge that we are small, that our memory is short, and that the silence of the universe is vast. A future intelligence millions of years from now may dig through the strata of the Anthropocene. They will find our plastic. They will find our radioactive isotopes. But will they find our footprints on the moon? Or will they look up at that desolate gray sphere and wonder, just as we do, if anyone ever had the courage to cross the fire? If this journey into the shadows of history has resonated with you, and if you believe that the questions are often more important than the answers, please share this video with others who wonder what lies beneath the surface. And do not forget to subscribe, for there are many more layers of the unknown left to excavate.